If you've been with us for the last 4 weeks, this is the fifth and final week of our series, Trust Issues. We've been talking about how we all have trust issues and what to do with them. So last week we talked about how do I rebuild trust if trust has been broken. And today I want to talk to you about dogs. There's a dog right here, so cover his ears. He's a good dog, so he's fine. No, my sister-in-law, Lachelle, who is actually up here playing keys today, they have a wonderful little puppy named Bella. And Bella is a lemon beagle. She's as sweet as the day is long. But she has ruined my children for other dogs, right? My son has grown up with Bella, and he thinks if you yank on a dog's ear, poke him in the eye, pull on its tail, that they just kind of roll with it, right? So he has this expectation of a dog with very little boundaries, right? This dog is like, that's fine. And we all know with dogs, that's not all dogs. I should say we all know, but some dog owners don't know about their own dogs. So I'm a parent, not a dog owner. In fact, one of the things we love most about Bella is we're like dog grandparents, kind of. They come over, we play with them, and then we send her back home with mom to poop in her yard and eat her dog food, right? But I'm not a dog person, but I'm often at the park. We love to go on hikes, and I cannot tell you how much it drives me nuts when someone's dog runs up and starts licking my son, and I have a moment of like, am I about to fight this dog? And then they go, oh, no, they're nice. And again, I'm sorry if this offends you as a dog owner, but that's wonderful that you think your dog is nice. For me, it's a moment of, right? The other one they get is, oh, he's great with kids. That's wonderful. And then when he knocks my kid over and my kid's crying, he doesn't normally do that. That's so weird. Come on. Right? Oh, he loves kids. He loves to knock kids over. Or sometimes we'll be on a hike and two dogs are fighting. And they're both yelling while their dogs are fighting like they're really nice. I grew up with dogs, but especially with our own dogs, we tend to think our dogs are super well behaved and super well trained. And we're maybe not the best at judging the limitations and the boundaries that need to be set up around our own dogs. And I wish that was just the case with dogs. The truth of the matter is, we as human beings are not as good as we think we are at judging people, especially often the people that are closest to us. Because dogs are simple. Dogs are wonderful, right? If you're their owner, they see you, they love you, they're happy. Human beings are a little bit more complex, a little more temperamental. And the thing is that there's something wrong with a lot of our wiring as humans that keeps us from recognizing patterns that would help us to protect ourselves from bad relationships and bad interactions. Right? With people, we don't always map their tendencies, right? It's like that dog who just keeps knocking kids over and they're like, he doesn't normally do that today, you know? We want to kind of move on. We have a hard time really keeping up with those tendencies, that background. And the thing is, what's funny is it's really easy to see in other people. We all have a friend like this, right? Who they've started dating another guy, and they're like, he's totally different. His tattoos are on his left arm, just totally different guy. And you as your friend, you hang out with him one evening and you're like, this is the same guy. The whole night while you're eating dinner with him, he's just looking at his tattoos in his arms and you're like, come on, buddy. It's the same story. Or the same group of friends, they leave a whole group of friends behind and then they find like the clone of that group of friends. Or that job, right? They flame out, quit their job, and then they go right into almost the exact same job. We can see the tendencies, we can track the track record. And then when they come to us like 2 weeks later, heartbroken, we have to be like, what? No, I did not see that coming. But we did, and we told them. And we do it too. We all do this. We all miss the red flags. We all miss the signs. We've been really in Proverbs a lot in this series. And the reason is Proverbs is what is called wisdom literature. It's Hebrew wisdom literature. And it was collected and put together, right? Proverbs, Solomon didn't just sit down and write down Proverbs. It wasn't just like Jack Kerouac, just like this is all Proverbs. It was a collection of wisdom. And we talked about it last week. There's 3 people in the Proverbs. There's the wise, the foolish, and the evildoer. And most often they're kind of talking about the wise person and the foolish person, right? A wise person is someone who would live a well-led life in that culture. A fool is someone who would have a life we would not want. So we're going to keep reading in Proverbs 4. In verse 8, it says this: "The prudent understand where they are going, but fools deceive themselves." We're going to talk more about that, but the wise, they know where they're going, and they know who they're going with. Fools deceive themselves. In verse 12, it says this: "There is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death." And this is a theme of the entire Old Testament, right? It says, if you read in the Old Testament time and time again, they did what was right in their own eyes. Right? Again and again, we as humans, we think we know better than God, and it leads to death. And then in verses 15 and 16, it says this: "Only simpletons believe everything they're told. The prudent carefully consider their steps. The wise are cautious and avoid danger. Fools plunge ahead with reckless confidence." In other words, foolish people don't pay attention to the patterns, and they make decisions based on, they don't make the decision based on track records. They make their decision based on feelings. And the thing is, don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. The reason that we're given Proverbs, the reason that we're taught to be wise, is that we don't trend towards wisdom. You don't wake up one day just suddenly, oh. And let me tell you, I'm in hospice. I work with older people. There are some older people that I sit down with where I'm just like, tell me how you lived your life, because wisdom just pours out of them. They didn't accidentally get to that point. And I sit with a lot of people who I love and I listen to, but I'm not writing anything they're telling me down. I look at the life that they've led, and they didn't do the work to become wise. And you can see it in their life. So why is that? Why is it that we all love the YouTube that tells us these things about how we should live? We all know the statistics, and yet many of us end up living foolish lives. Well, I think there are some reasons, and we're going to talk about 5 of them. The first one is, we didn't learn to evaluate trustworthiness as kids, right? Who we surround ourselves shapes who we are. And how we've been shaped often informs what we're drawn to, right? If we surround ourselves with good people, that shapes us to be like those people. But often as we grew up, we were shaped in a way that the people we feel really comfortable with are not good people. A parent's job is to teach their kid what traits are trustworthy and aren't trustworthy, and how to spot them. But depending on how you grew up, if you had parents that were either too permissive, or, God forbid, some of us in this room likely grew up with abusive parents, neglectful parents. And so we don't really know what to look for, because we're designed to want what we're comfortable with. Well, what about when what you're comfortable with isn't healthy? If you grew up in one of those homes, what may feel like home to you is chaos. And so what do you find yourself looking for in romantic partners or close friends? Is that chaos. And that's really hard. Let me just pause to say, if you're one of those people, first of all, my heart breaks for you, because that is really tough. When our instincts inside of us are screaming one thing, but we kind of know we're supposed to go the other way, that's really hard to unravel. And so we're going to talk about that. Because when we teach our kids to say no, to protect themselves, to give them the ability to have difficult conversations and address conflict and choose healthy friends, it's like installing a steering wheel into a car before it leaves the factory. And many of us left without that steering wheel. And it's no wonder we look back at our lives and it's just all over the road. And the hard thing is, each of us as human beings have a deep need to be loved and accepted. And when we come out of a home like that, we are often even more desperate for belonging and love. And so sometimes that leads us to accept love from the people that are just saying it the loudest, right? That person who says, I love you, that gives you that attention that you've been wanting your whole life, only to find down the road you missed those red flags, that they were not trustworthy. But we can learn to spot these people. We can do the work of discovering more about ourselves, and we can start to rewire our tendencies towards health. Because the second reason that we miss these red flags is we make decisions based on feelings, not patterns. Randy did a sermon quite a while back. I was trying to remember when it was with my wife last night. And he was talking about how we often make decisions from deep emotional places, not from logic. But then in our head, we kind of reverse engineer our way back to the decision we made emotionally, trying to say that it was logical. I got some good friends of mine that are just very proud of how logical they are. But I can look from the outside and be like, make deep emotional decisions, right? Some of the decisions they make, you're like, that is not a logical decision. But we all like to think that we're more logical. There's actually a guy, Daniel Kahneman, he's a Nobel awarded psychologist, and he did some research and he realized that emotions contribute about 90% to our decision making and logic only 10%. So as human beings, we make decisions based on our feelings, not really on patterns or on logic. We tend to want to trust people that we have a good gut feeling about. But like we just said, if we grew up around dysfunction, our gut is going to feel right at home with dysfunction. And this tends to lead us to repeat the same poor relational decisions again and again. And if you've noticed this tendency, it may be a good thing to start to ask as we get to know ourselves better, why do I do this? Why do I have a hard time seeing what other people's, like my friends, seem to see every time? What's keeping me from recognizing the untrustworthiness of that person? And why am I drawn to the same type of unhealthy person again and again? Because each experience that we have with a person, it shows us their pattern or it shows us our pattern, right? It says the wise, they look forward. The fool rushes ahead. Part of not rushing ahead is knowing ourselves. Yes, it's good to study that other person and look for those tendencies, but we got to know ourselves too. For me, I always say it this way, and then my wife, if she's listening, will laugh at this. I never in a meeting need to be telling myself in my head, Charlie, you should speak up more. Never once in a meeting have I left and been like, wow, Charlie hardly spoke. So if I go into meetings and I go, man, I really need to stand up for myself, I'm going to be dominating the meeting. And afterwards, people are going to be like, we cannot have Charlie in these meetings. But some of us are the opposite. Some of you need to speak your mind. You need to be telling yourself, right? Part of that is knowing myself. And in those relationships, you need to know, I tend to be drawn towards this type of person. I need to be on guard for those red flags that I'm tempted to miss. The thing is, if we keep making the same mistakes, we're going to keep having the same results. And if I don't want that same result, I need to make a change. And this is the great part. You don't have to do this alone. If you tend to miss the same things, surround yourself with trustworthy people. Find some trustworthy friends and ask them to help you to see those things. In week 2, we talked about this, that there are 5 essentials of trust. They are understanding, motive, ability, character, and track record. Find somebody with those 5 things. Surround yourself with them. One of the reasons that we tend to miss these red flags is because we don't know how to set and enforce boundaries. If I'm honest, this is the thing I was most excited to talk about. So if you don't know, I work as a hospice chaplain. So I visit people that are dying, and I help their families often process through grief. And boundaries are such a huge part of kind of any relationship. And so boundaries is something I talk about a lot. And the truth is that being able to clearly and unashamedly tell someone that something they do bothers you is essential in a healthy relationship. It could be something as simply as like, hey, I don't like when you talk to me like that. Or I didn't like the way that happened. I didn't like how that made me feel. But the truth of the matter is some of us grew up and were either taught, either explicitly or implicitly, that we shouldn't speak up for ourselves, that we couldn't set boundaries. And so those people struggle to set those boundaries. There's a guy named Terry Real, and he has a book called Fierce Intimacy, and he's a counselor, and he talks about our boundaries are kind of like a wall, right? And these type of people, their wall is so low that everything gets in, right? Some stranger on the street tells them something about themselves, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's probably true, right? They take it in. Or their mother-in-law says, hey, we would love to come over on Thursday. And even though in their heart of hearts, they're like, I do not want to have you over on Thursday. They say, we would love to have you on Thursday every time, right? These people have no boundaries. And that results in resentment. They blame the other people, when in reality, they just don't know how to set those healthy boundaries. Often because the home that they grew up in, through coercion and manipulation, said, nope, boundaries are not a good thing. And this creates all sorts of problems because it causes them to spin out of control. They get ignored and they become conflict avoidant, right? And this is so true. Anytime there's any sort of conflict, you can just see me. My hackles go up. I hate conflict. But the truth of the matter is if we avoid conflict, we teach others how to treat us by what we address and what we allow, right? When we leave that wall low, we teach people that's how we operate. That's not necessarily their fault. That's our fault for not having the health to confront in a kind way and set our boundaries. If we don't talk about what we need with others and what we want from others, we can blame them afterwards, but truly it was our fault. They're unintentionally stepping on our toes and crossing lines that they don't know exist. Now, some of you may have actually grown up from a family of origin where your walls are too high, right? Nothing gets in. Maybe some of us are married to that type of person, right? They just grew to just stonewall. They don't let anything in because they had to protect themselves. And so they tend to make decisions and just steamroll people. They can't listen. They don't hear anything. They can't ever grow because no one can ever tell them anything. That's the other extreme. We need to find a place in between. And when our kids grow up with parents who treat each other with respect, with openness and honesty, our hope is that they're going to internalize that normal. They learn how to have boundaries. They learn to say, I don't like that. And yet when someone comes to them who loves them and has a critique, they're able to put their guard down and hear them. We talked about this last week. When we want to build trust, it's really hard to build trust with somebody whose wall is up here, who can't hear you, who won't change, right? If we're going to be wise, we need to be able to hear truth from people that we love. You see, our children should be like a bank teller, right? They can tell a counterfeit by feeling it. Instead, some of us grow up and we can't tell a counterfeit from anything because we were given the counterfeit growing up. A kid who is raised around healthy relationships is able to see, label, and confront what isn't healthy and build a boundary around it. But many of us don't have that skill. Having a boundary conversation looks like, hey, what happened between us, it's not okay with me. And until we talk through this, until we come to a new place, we need to have a different plan. I can't move forward. Now, what I love to say in working with people is boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and you can love me. And just like different relationships have different boundaries, just like with Bella, our little grand puppy or whatever it is, who comes over to our house, she is so sweet, we don't have to worry about the boundaries as much. There's not as much boundaries. Now, a dog we don't know, whoa, big boundaries at first. In the same way in our relationships, right? My wife and I have been married 11 years. There are boundaries. There are conversations that we've had of saying, hey, I didn't like that, or no, can we not do that? But those boundaries are lower. I'm able to let more in with more trust because we've built trust over those years. But with other people, that wall might be higher at first, right? We don't just immediately trust everybody. One of the things that I talk about a lot is family dynamics in grief. And I cannot tell you how many people I go visit in hospice, they're on their deathbed and they say, I have not spoken to my son in 20 years. And every time it just breaks my heart. And I think we live in a culture where there's a lot of great stuff going out where people are realizing that maybe the way that their parents behaved or the way that their sibling behaves, it's not healthy. And I think we've started to throw this word toxic around. And now we're just learning to say, oh, they're toxic, cut them off. Boundary up, boundary up, boundary up. And I want to pause here and I want to say that there are legitimate reasons that we would cut someone off. There are. in things, in abusive relationships and unhealthy relationships that reach a certain point, that is absolutely healthy. But I think we've skipped some steps. Too often I see family relationships end about things that really just should have been some changes in boundaries. I have people that I love, people that I'm close to, who the boundaries between us have grown over the years because of some unhealth. I'm not at the point where I need to cut them out of my life completely, but the boundaries are different than they used to be. And there is a point where if someone keeps stemming over your boundaries, you may need to make that call. But it breaks my heart when people get to the end of their life and realize that for 20 years they haven't spoken to their son, and they can't even remember what the fight was about. Because instead of having mature emotional conversations, they just cut them off. But some of it is because we don't really understand boundaries. Now, last week we talked about being specific when we are coming back and building trust together. We also need to be specific about boundaries. A boundary is not, you better stop being a jerk or else. That's not a boundary, right? What does that mean that he needs to stop being a jerk? Or she, I should be, Generally, I can be a jerk, so. Or else, what does that mean? A boundary says, if you do this, then my response will be this. That gives them the chance to honor that boundary. And just like last week, we talked about experimenting, right? When we set up a boundary, if someone breaks that boundary, well, then we need to increase that boundary. We need to go through with what we said. For example, if we're in your home and you disrespect me again, then my family and I are going to leave. And next time you come over to that house, there's going to be a different boundary. We're not going to your house. You can come to our house if you want, and if you act disrespectfully, we will ask you to leave, right? We're experimenting. We're making bigger and bigger boundaries. I have people that I don't see very often. I see them once a year. Why? Because that's the boundary I've set. I don't want to be around that person more than once a year. I still love them. I still hope someday that boundary can be let down. But that's how we need to move forward, is by setting clear boundaries. Another reason that we struggle with people is not just our inability to set boundaries, but it's because we treat betrayals as accidents, not patterns. And we see this sometimes with kids with overprotective parents, right? They didn't grow up and have appropriate social interactions. The helicopter mom came in every time there was tension, every time there was a little fight, and they never learned how to go through conflict. They never had a social interaction go poorly, and they don't really learn how to do the right thing. And they can't tell the difference between those people that they can trust, those people that are good for them, and those that they need to protect themselves from. This happened this week. This week we had our last swim lesson with my daughter, Anna, and I get to go to swim lessons with her. It's a lot of fun. I'm in the pool with her, and just dad fail moment. She went down the slide one time with the teacher, and then you could have the option. I was like, they could go by themselves. And I was like, yeah, Anna, go ahead, go by yourself. And so I'm the opposite of a helicopter parent, unfortunately, for Anna that day. She pushed her down the slide, and she just ping-ponged down the slide, and the final look I got was her just head backwards, just terror in her eyes, just like, And so she got out of the pool and kept saying, Daddy, that scare me. Daddy, that scare me. Yeah, it was very sad. Also, she said that about the Easter bunny this year for Easter. She, for like 2 weeks, kept saying, bunnies scare me. Just out of nowhere, she'd be sitting in the room, Daddy, bunnies scare me. So maybe we need to be more helicoptery. But anyway, I was standing there in line for the slide with Anna, and these two little boys are just kind of pushing back and forth. And I'm like, okay, I notice it. But I'm a dad. I'm not going to, that is not my problem. At some point, one little boy starts crying. And this grandma comes over and tells the teacher, that little boy was bullying my grandson. And I was like, honestly, they were both going at it. And she goes, yeah, but they just, and I was like, I didn't tell her. I was like, okay, I'm going to get in trouble. That kid had poked the other kid in the eye, right? But grandma swoops in, protects him. He doesn't ever have to learn that when you go back and forth with a kid, maybe don't poke him in the eye. But instead, grandma comes in, you're the hero, you didn't do anything wrong, right? And that kid was robbed of a social interaction because grandma's trying to protect him. Now, some of us maybe didn't have that overprotective mom or grandma, but because we learn by experience, and when we keep preventing ourselves from having these emotional interactions, we don't learn the lesson. So either way, maybe some of us just kind of are overly trusting. We're a little bit naive. We tend to just trust people at face value. We don't learn to look for and test if people are really trustworthy. Maybe we're just really invested. Maybe we've invested a lot in this person, and that causes us to maybe look past some of those red flags. And we don't see that even when we have these conversations, they have no motivation to change. They're not seeing what we're seeing. I really love this, Psalm 101. David wrote this, and I think it's really telling. You got to think David was a king. People wanted to be around the king, right? The king was the center of the kingdom, and he always had those sycophants, the people that would tell him what he wanted to hear. And this is what David said. This was his process that he came to about how to trust people. Psalm 101 says this, I will sing of your love and justice, Lord. I will praise you with songs. I will be careful to live a blameless life. When will you come to help me? I will lead a life of integrity in my own home. I will refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. I hate all who deal crookedly. I will have nothing to do with them. I will reject perverse ideas and stay away from every evil. I will not tolerate people who slander their neighbors. I will not endure conceit and pride. I will search for faithful people to be my companions. Only those who are above reproach will be allowed to serve me. I will not allow deceivers to serve in my house, and liars will not stay in my presence. My daily task will be to ferret out the wicked and free the city of the Lord from their grasp. I love this because this was passed down for our benefit. He says those who are manipulative, those who are evil, those who are slanderous, who gossip, who lie, who are proud-hearted, narcissistic, judgmental, or deceptive, do not put our trust in them. Get them out of our home. Do not surround ourselves with those type of people. But often the reason that we stay stuck in these patterns is that we are too stubborn or embarrassed to utilize outside help. We either don't like admitting that we don't know what we're doing, despite a lot of the evidence, or that what we're doing isn't working. And other times we don't mind admitting it to ourselves, but we don't know who else to admit it to. And I loved this quote. It said, healthy relationships are never the result of just two people. I tend to be like this too. When I have a problem, I'll go to YouTube. I'll find a book. I'll read about it. But man, I will not tell anybody about it. And there have been things in my life, areas of blindness and areas of weakness that were never resolved until I got into a group of people and started to get honest and deal with it. And the thing that breaks my heart is that's what the church is meant to be. We talked about this last week. Church is often the place where we come and we act like everything's fine and we fake our way through it. This isn't a gala. This isn't an event for you to show off. This is a place for broken people to come and find healing. I think often more church happens in AA rooms and sobriety rooms all across this nation than happens on Sunday morning in our places of worship because we're not willing to get honest. Because the truth is that if a relationship is going well, there are certain conversations and confrontations that are going to be difficult to have. You need help sometimes. Even the best marriages. I hate when we think about counseling as this point of like, man, I'm just going to drag my barely alive emotionally body into this room and get help. The truth of the matter is sometimes you just need a tune-up. Sometimes you need to go in and understand like, why am I still in this place? Or about this, why do I keep trusting the wrong people? And often those questions are deep and they involve a lot of pain and they're tough for us to talk about on ourselves. So part of it is just insulating yourself in the right community, coming to church, getting to know some people, surrounding yourself with people that push you towards health. And don't be ashamed or afraid to ask for the help that you need. Like we said earlier, sometimes we have instincts and gut feelings that are wrong, that are pushing us away from the life we want to lead. And you can't just gut through those, right? That can be part of why we have anxiety. We have these underlying thoughts and feelings that we know aren't true, but they feel so true. And getting counseling can help us become aware and to start making those changes. So if I could summarize all 5 of these things by saying this, we avoid mistrust by mapping patterns, right? Not being a fool that's just rushing ahead, but start noticing patterns by setting boundaries and by listening to emotionally healthy advisors. And that's hard to do if you've never done that before. For some of you, maybe like we talked about last week, you just struggle to trust anybody. And that's not how you were meant to live. But you also shouldn't trust everybody. We talked about it last week that Jesus, when he gets really popular, all these people start to put their trust in him. He does not put his trust in them. We need to be cautious about putting our trust in people. And that might sound harsh, but last week we talked about in Matthew 25, right? The master that goes away and leaves his servants. We didn't read the beginning of that passage though. It goes like this. The kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on a trip. He went based on their track record, based on their abilities. He had had dealings with these servants before, and he made that judgment call to say, I'm going to trust you a little bit more, you not so much, and you I'm not really going to trust. He didn't experiment. And then later in Matthew 25:19, the master comes back and he says this, after a long time, the master returned from his trip and called them to give an account. Right? He did an experiment. And we know because we finished that passage last week that some he said, well done, good and faithful servant. I'm going to give you more. And to the one who didn't come through, he took away responsibilities. In the same way, we test and we see. Right? The 2 that were proven trustworthy, they were given more because trust is earned. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it is. Trust is earned. And if you don't want to keep getting burned, you have to stop extending trust to people in areas where they are untrustworthy. Matthew 7 says it this way, and I love this. A good tree produces good fruit. A bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce good fruit, no matter how cute he is, no matter how much you want that person to be a close friend. And a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. And if it's hard for you to identify people by their fruit, then you need to surround yourself with people who are good at it, and you need to take their advice. Let them be that person who licks in on your life and goes, bad fruit. And you got to retrain that instinct, retrain that gut. And I want to say this too. If you weren't raised perfect, that's okay. I wasn't either.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.